The green light beside my webcam flickered on at 2:17 a.m., and for a second, I thought it was my imagination trying to scare me awake. I hadn't touched the laptop. I hadn't even opened it. It sat on the desk across the room like a sleeping animal, silent, closed, harmless. The light stayed on. In the dark, it was the brightest thing in my apartment, a tiny, confident eye staring back at me. I lay still, listening to my own breathing, to the muted hum of Georgetown at night, distant traffic, a siren that faded too quickly, the old radiator whispering in the walls. The moment stretched until it felt like the room had changed shape. I got out of bed without turning on a light. Habit. You don't announce yourself when you suspect someone else is already in the room, digitally or otherwise. I crossed the floor slowly, bare feet cold against hardwood, and stopped in front of the desk. The laptop's lid was sealed, no obvious sign of tampering. The webcam light, however, didn't care about appearances. I reached for the power cable first and pulled it from the wall. The light didn't go out. That's when my stomach tightened. Not fear exactly, but recognition. This wasn't a consumer-grade hack. This wasn't some teenager scraping passwords. This was someone who didn't need my permission to enter my devices. Someone who could keep a camera powered when the machine itself looked asleep. Someone with resources. Someone with motive. Washington, D.C. teaches you early that motive is everything. People don't move against you without a reason. They don't spend money without expected return. And no one watches you at 2 in the morning unless they're confirming something. That you're alone. That you're nervous. That you're about to make a mistake. My name is Vincent Archer. I don't tell stories for a living. I don't chase attention. I'm the guy behind the numbers, the one who reads the patterns no one else sees because everyone else is busy reading the narrative they want to believe. I work across the river in Arlington, Virginia for a federal technology contractor with multiple clients whose names aren't said out loud in elevators. Officially, we optimize data infrastructure. We improve efficiency. We harden systems. We build safe pipelines for information to travel from one secure place to another. Unofficially, we touch streams of data that aren't supposed to exist in domestic space. And we do it behind legal language and classification markings that make normal people look away. 3 weeks earlier, I'd been assigned to audit a set of back-end access logs after a minor internal incident. An anomaly in reporting, they called it. It wasn't minor. Not to me. The data volume spike was too clean, too precise. It looked like an extraction, not a glitch. At first, I assumed it was mislabeling. Metadata sampling can get messy, especially when multiple systems translate between formats. But when I traced the packets and reconstructed the flow, I saw full content pulls. Messages, attachments, voice transcriptions, U.S. citizen identifiers wrapped in clean indexes. No warrants attached, no legal flags, just raw access. The logs were careful. Whoever built the system knew that logs are where sin is recorded. They buried escalation steps inside nested permissions and service accounts. They used time windows to smear patterns. They routed authentication through layers that made it look like routine administrative work. But routine work doesn't pull content at that scale. Routine work doesn't bypass oversight keys. Routine work doesn't hide. 2 names stood out to me immediately, not because they were directly guilty, but because they were consistently adjacent to the activity. Daniel Cole, the CEO of our parent corporation in Silicon Valley, had signed a classified contract expansion 2 months prior. Ethan Brooks, our internal compliance officer, had approved the updated security framework and insisted it aligned with federal guidelines. I asked Ethan about it once in the break area, like it was casual curiosity. He smiled without warmth. "Don't chase ghosts," he said. "You'll only find what you're already afraid of." I'd smiled back. I'm good at that. I've learned that in this city, reactions are receipts. If you flinch, someone saves it. That night, after the webcam light came on, I understood the real purpose of Ethan's advice. It wasn't meant to protect me. It was meant to keep me predictable, keep me inside the lane. I didn't touch the laptop again. I didn't even close my eyes. I walked to the kitchen, took a glass from the cabinet, and filled it with water using the slowest stream to avoid noise. My hands didn't shake. I drank like I was calm, because calm is an instrument. Then I moved. I powered down the router. I disconnected the smart thermostat. I pulled the plug on anything with a microphone. In the bathroom, I covered the small ventilation camera the building management claimed didn't exist. I'd suspected it for months. Now I didn't care about being polite. When I returned to the desk, the webcam light was finally gone. Not because I'd won, because whoever was watching had decided they'd seen enough. The ending was theirs. I sat down and stared at the laptop. In my head, I replayed the last week like a forensic timeline. The late-night network pings, the odd battery drain on my phone, the brief stutter in my building's security camera feed when I tried to review it, the missing seconds that shouldn't be missing. This wasn't random. It was escalation. And I knew why. Because I'd done something that no one had asked me to do. I had copied a segmented set of logs onto an encrypted drive. Not for release. Not even for blackmail. For survival. In my line of work, you don't keep the only evidence of misconduct inside the system controlled by the people committing it. The moment I made that copy, I stopped being a quiet analyst. I became a risk. By morning, I had a plan. I drove to an electronics store in Alexandria, paid cash for a new laptop, and refused the extended warranty like it was a trap. I didn't sign up for an email receipt. I didn't use a rewards number. I left the box in the trunk for an hour to make sure no one had preloaded anything. Paranoid, maybe, but I've seen stranger. Back at home, I installed a clean operating system offline. No cloud sign-in, no syncing, no imported passwords. I built a sterile environment like I was prepping for surgery. Then I went back to the logs at work with a new mindset. Not what is wrong, but who is protected. 2 days later, I found the answer. The administrative override credentials weren't simply executive. They were linked through a node that made my skin go cold when I recognized it. A routing pattern that touched Langley, Virginia. Not a myth, not a rumor. A real government-linked architecture fingerprint I'd seen once before in a classified document I wasn't supposed to keep mentally bookmarked. If that link was real, then the misconduct wasn't just corporate. It was institutional. And institutions don't negotiate with individual analysts. They erase them. That evening, I didn't go home right away. I walked through the city like a normal man with normal worries. I bought coffee. I stood in line. I let strangers brush past me. I watched reflections in windows. A man's posture tells you if he's waiting for someone. When I finally returned to Georgetown, I noticed a car parked across the street. Black SUV, tinted windows, engine off, too clean to be a neighbor's. I told myself it could be nothing. Then my phone buzzed at 9:14 p.m. No caller ID. I let it ring twice before answering. Silence. A breath, controlled, not nervous. Then a single sentence in a voice that didn't need to sound threatening to be terrifying. Some discoveries are career-ending, Vincent. The line went dead. I stared at my phone for a long moment, feeling the weight of that calm certainty. They weren't warning me because they were afraid. They were warning me because they were generous enough to offer an off-ramp. They believed I would take it. They didn't understand something about me. I don't react emotionally. I calculate. And they had just admitted they were watching, which meant the game had officially begun. My access badge failed at 8:42 a.m. The scanner flashed red like a small, humiliating alarm. I'd used that badge every workday for years, sometimes half asleep, sometimes carrying coffee and a stack of printouts, sometimes rushing because a meeting got moved forward without warning. It never failed. Not until today. I held it to the reader again, steady hand, neutral face. Red. I didn't look around immediately. That was the instinct. Check who's watching. Check who's enjoying it. But instinct is often what gets you caught. I waited a beat, then turned toward the security desk as if this were a normal inconvenience. The guard, a man with a military posture and a polite lack of personality, checked his screen. He didn't meet my eyes. Looks like your clearance is suspended, he said, voice flat, as if he were reading weather. Suspended? I repeated lightly. A question, not a protest. Talk to your supervisor. Of course. Inside the building, behind those glass walls, people sat at desks with dual monitors and clean smiles. They typed. They laughed quietly. They lived inside the illusion that systems were fair. I didn't. I walked to the visitor entrance and signed in under my own name. It felt like stepping into a courtroom without counsel. The visitor badge hung around my neck, bright and obvious, a label that said, "This person is temporary. This person has less power." As I waited for an escort, I checked my phone. A notification from my bank. Unusual activity detected. Account access temporarily restricted. I stared at the message until it stopped being words and became meaning. Money is how they apply pressure without touching you. It's how they make you smaller without leaving bruises. An escort arrived, Ethan Brooks. He approached with his hands in his pockets and a smile that could have belonged to a friend if his eyes weren't so careful. "Vincent," he said, as if we were running into each other at a coffee shop. "I didn't know you worked security now," I replied. He chuckled softly. "Just doing what needs to be done." We walked through the hallways together. Every camera felt awake. Every badge reader sounded louder than usual. I noticed small changes, new keypads, a different angle on a ceiling lens, an added sensor near a door that used to have only one. They were tightening. Ethan led me into a conference room with frosted glass and a view of the parking lot. A man in a suit sat at the far end of the table, laptop open, hands folded. He didn't stand when I entered. He didn't offer his name. He didn't need to. Daniel Cole had the kind of face you see in magazine profiles, clean, confident, controlled. He looked like Silicon Valley success designed in a lab. Tailored suit, no tie, watch that cost more than my car. He didn't look like a villain. He looked like a man who had never been told no. "Vincent Archer," he said like he was confirming a file. "Daniel Cole," I replied, taking the seat across from him without waiting for invitation. If you ask permission in a room like this, you give it away in every future moment. Daniel smiled. "I'm glad you could make time." My visitor badge hung between us like an insult. Ethan closed the door and stayed inside. Not a participant, but a witness. Or a leash. Daniel tapped a key, and a screen behind him lit up with a bland slide. Policy updates. The corporate version of anesthesia. "We're conducting a routine compliance review," he said. "Some irregular access patterns were flagged. It's nothing personal. But we need your cooperation." The lie was smooth. Routine. Nothing personal. Cooperation. "What kind of irregular patterns?" I asked. Daniel's eyes didn't move. "We'll get there." He slid a document across the table. A revised non-disclosure agreement. New clauses, wider definitions, penalties that read like someone wanted to scare a person into silence before that person even spoke. "Sign this," Daniel said. "We'll reinstate your access. We'll move forward." I glanced at the paper, then back at him. "And if I don't?" Daniel leaned back. "Then your position becomes complicated." Ethan's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. I didn't touch the pen. "This isn't about compliance." Daniel's eyebrows lifted slightly, amused. "Isn't it?" I chose my words carefully. In a room like this, words are weapons that can be turned against you. I audited logs. I found content extraction beyond authorized scope. Daniel didn't deny it. He didn't even pretend to misunderstand. He simply watched me, like he was measuring how far I'd go. "That's a serious accusation," he said softly. "It's a serious pattern," I replied. He closed his laptop halfway, the motion calm, almost tender, like ending a conversation with a child. "Vincent, you're talented. You've done good work. We can protect you, give you a package, relocation support, a consulting role, quiet." There it was, the off-ramp again. I looked toward the frosted glass. Shadows passed outside, People moving through their day. Normal life continuing, unaware of the machinery. "You can't buy silence forever," I said. Daniel's smile vanished. "We don't need forever." The temperature in the room dropped, not physically but psychologically. The moment his expression changed, I understood the truth. Daniel wasn't here to negotiate. He was here to confirm whether I was still manageable. Ethan stepped forward and placed a folder on the table. "We also noticed your workstation accessed certain directories outside your assigned scope." I met Ethan's eyes. "You noticed." He didn't blink. "The system noticed." I almost laughed. The system. As if the system had an opinion. As if the system acted without hands. Daniel spoke again, voice low. "There are things you don't understand. You're interpreting fragments without context." "I understand the math," I said. "And I understand the absence of warrants." Daniel held my gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded once, like concluding an experiment. "Okay," he said. "Then we need to contain risk." Contain risk. Not correct wrongdoing. Not clarify policy. Contain me. He pushed the NDA closer. "Sign, or you become the subject of a different kind of review." I imagined the next steps. Internal investigation. Security interview. Home visit. Confiscated devices. Frozen accounts. An accusation framed in language that made me look like the criminal. "You're asking me to sign away my rights," I said. Daniel's voice was almost gentle. "I'm giving you a chance to stay alive in this world." That was the first time he said something true. I stood, slowly, to avoid giving them the satisfaction of seeing haste. "I want my attorney present." Daniel's eyes hardened. "You don't have an attorney." I smiled slightly. "Not yet." Ethan moved toward the door as if to block me. Then he reconsidered. Blocking me would be physical. Physical leaves evidence. Evidence invites scrutiny. They preferred invisible pressure. Daniel gave a small shrug. "Take the day," he said. "Decide what kind of person you want to be." As I left the room, my phone buzzed again. Another bank notification. Another restriction. Another tightening ring. When Ethan escorted me out, we passed the lobby windows. Outside in the parking lot, the black SUV sat in a space that didn't belong to any employee. The driver wasn't visible. Ethan followed my gaze and smiled, almost kindly. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I stepped into the cold air and walked toward my car like I was alone. But I felt the eyes. Not just from the SUV, from the entire system that had decided I was an anomaly to be corrected. By the time I reached the driver's seat, my hands were still steady. My mind wasn't. Because now I knew something worse than being watched. I knew they were moving. I changed routes 3 times, and the SUV stayed behind me every time. At first, it was a distant shadow in the rearview mirror, a shape that could have belonged to anyone heading toward DC in morning traffic. But shadows don't mirror your decisions. Shadows don't take the same sudden exit you take when you realize you're being followed. I exited onto a smaller road near Foggy Bottom. The SUV followed. I turned right, then left, then right again. The SUV kept its distance, professional, not aggressive, like someone who didn't need to rush because they owned time. My mind began layering probabilities. Could it be coincidence? Statistically possible. But probability collapses when a pattern repeats through intentional choices. After the 3rd route change, coincidence became denial. I drove toward a busy stretch near the river where there were plenty of cameras and plenty of eyes. Public is safety, but only if the public matters to your enemy. If your enemy operates above public scrutiny, crowds become theater. I parked near a coffee shop and sat in the car without turning off the engine. Across the street, the SUV rolled past slowly, then continued. It didn't park. It didn't stop. It wanted me to know it had been there. A message, again. I pulled out my phone, opened a secure notes app, and typed a single line. Surveillance confirmed. Physical tail. Escalation level 2. Then I deleted the line. Some habits are pointless when you assume your device is compromised. I wasn't writing evidence for myself. I was writing it for whoever might be reading over my shoulder. Instead, I did the only thing that mattered. I committed to my contingency plan. If you grow up in this city long enough, you learn that the worst moment to build strategy is after the threat becomes visible. Strategy has to exist before fear. I'd been preparing quietly since the night the webcam light came on. I went home, not to rest, but to move. Inside my apartment, I packed fast and clean. Clothes without logos, cash, my sterile laptop, the encrypted drive hidden in the hollowed book, and a second phone I'd bought months ago for travel. I left the apartment looking normal, like I was going to the gym or the grocery store, because normal is camouflage. The elevator mirrored my face back at me, calm, slightly tired, nothing dramatic. In the lobby, the building's security guard nodded. He didn't know he was part of a chessboard. Most pieces never do. Outside, the air was sharp. I walked 2 blocks before checking my reflection in a storefront window. A man lingered behind me, not close, not far. Maybe a jogger, maybe nothing, maybe something. I didn't confront. Confrontation creates spectacle. Spectacle creates justification. I got into my car and drove to Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport, not to fly, but to hide in motion. Airports are liminal spaces. No one belongs there long enough to be memorable. Cameras everywhere, but too much footage for one person to be special unless someone flags you. I checked into a hotel nearby under my real name. If they wanted to track me, let them. I wasn't trying to disappear yet. I was trying to set terms. In the hotel room, I powered up the sterile laptop and connected through a chain of secure networks I trusted more than my own home line. I opened my encrypted archive and selected a small, non-lethal portion of the logs. Enough to prove wrongdoing, not enough to expose sources or methods that could get someone killed and get me labeled a traitor. Then I sent it to a woman I'd never met in person, but had researched like my life depended on it. Rebecca Shaw, an attorney in New York known for defending whistleblowers when corporations and agencies tried to bury them. Her email address wasn't public. I'd found it through careful channels. People like her don't advertise to the world. They advertise to the desperate. Along with the file, I sent a message. I have evidence of unlawful domestic content extraction. I'm being surveilled. I need counsel and protective strategy. Then I did the most important thing. I activated my dead man switch. A simple mechanism, really, an automated release that required my periodic confirmation. If I missed a check-in window, the system would assume I was compromised and would distribute encrypted packets to multiple recipients. A journalist, a legal watchdog group, and a secured archive that could be accessed only with timed keys. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't dramatic. It was insurance. Because if I disappeared quietly, the story would disappear with me. I sat back on the bed and listened to the hotel's air conditioner churn. Somewhere outside, cars moved along the highway. Somewhere inside the building, someone laughed in the hallway. Normal life continuing, indifferent. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it ring twice and answered, breathing slow. Silence. Then text arrived instead, because voice can be traced, and they preferred clean. Stop now. This is your last warning. No punctuation, no signature, just certainty. I stared at the message until the letters stopped looking like ink and started looking like a hand around my throat. Then I typed a reply and erased it. Replies give them data, emotional data, timing data, behavioral data. Instead, I turned the phone off. I was past the point of negotiation. They had escalated to physical surveillance. They'd frozen my finances. They'd suspended my access. They'd delivered threats in the calm voice of someone who believed they were inevitable. I realized then that the real question wasn't whether I could win. It was whether I could stay alive long enough to make them lose. They thought I was running. I wasn't. I was arranging the board so that if they made a move against me, the move would be visible to people who mattered. New York City hit me like a different kind of power. Louder, faster, less polite. Washington hides power behind marble and procedure. New York wears it on the surface, in money, in media, in momentum. I flew out of Reagan National on a late afternoon flight and landed at LaGuardia under gray skies. No checked bags, no lingering. I took a yellow cab into Manhattan because rideshare apps are data fountains, and I wasn't interested in being convenient. Rebecca Shaw's office was in a building that looked unimpressive from the outside. That's how you know it's real. People who fight the powerful don't advertise with glass towers. She greeted me herself. Mid-40s, sharp eyes, voice that didn't waste syllables. She didn't shake my hand immediately. She assessed me first. Posture, tension. The kind of man I was when no one was telling me what to be. "Vincent Archer," she said. "Yes." "Sit," she said, and closed the door behind us. The click of the lock felt like stepping into a bunker. Her office was sparse. A desk, 2 chairs, a small shelf of legal texts, and a framed newspaper clipping about a past case. No trophies, no ego. I placed my sterile laptop on the table and slid it toward her. "I have logs, content extraction, domestic, no warrants." Rebecca didn't touch the device yet. "How did you get them?" "I was assigned an audit," I said. "I found anomalies. I traced permissions. I copied segmented logs." "That copy is your sin," she said. "Not judgmental, just factual. It's also your leverage." I nodded. "They're watching me." Rebecca finally opened the laptop, entering passwords with the careful precision of someone who has seen traps disguised as files. When the first dataset appeared, her expression didn't change. But I noticed the slight tightening around her eyes. Lawyers don't react for theater. They react when the stakes become concrete. "This is big," she said. "It's real," I replied. She looked up. "Big and real are different problems. Big gets you killed. Real gets you indicted." I exhaled slowly. "What's the path?" Rebecca leaned back. "There are 2 wars you fight here. One is legal. The other is narrative. The law can protect you if you play it correctly. The narrative can protect you if you make it too expensive to erase you." "I don't want media," I said automatically. "You don't want anonymity," she corrected. "But you may need visibility." She opened a folder and pulled out a printed sheet. Protocols, timelines, legal triggers. She spoke like a strategist, not a counselor. "We file in federal court," she said. "Southern District of New York. We seek emergency protection. We frame you as a whistleblower reporting unlawful domestic surveillance. We disclose enough to establish credibility without compromising classified methods that could be used against you. And if they accuse me of mishandling classified data?" "They will," Rebecca said. "So we control the sequence. We document your intent. We establish that you approached legal counsel before any public release. We show that your actions were protective, not malicious." I watched her map the battlefield like it was a chess problem she'd solved before. It was the first time in weeks I felt something like relief. Danger still present, but now paired with direction. Rebecca tapped the data set. "This points to corporate involvement, but there's more here." I hesitated. Then I decided. Holding back now would be another kind of suicide. "There's a routing fingerprint," I said quietly. "Langley." Rebecca's gaze sharpened. "You're sure?" "As sure as I can be without walking into their building and asking," I said. She didn't smile. "If that's true, this becomes a different level of threat." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm here." Rebecca stood and walked to the window, peering down at the street like she was checking for watchers. Then she turned back. "We need an independent verification channel," she said. "A journalist. Someone who knows how to handle sensitive material without turning it into a circus." I already knew the name. Marcus Hill. Investigative reporter. Pulitzer contender. Reputation for caution, not sensationalism. Rebecca read my expression. "You've thought about him." "I've read his work," I said. "He doesn't publish without anchors." "Good," she said. "We'll approach him once the legal filings are in motion, not before." I nodded. "And what about my accounts, my access, the pressure?" Rebecca's answer was simple. "We make it public in court. We put it on record. Once it's on record, every action they take against you becomes a line in a file a judge can read. A judge, a court, light. I had spent my career inside systems that feared light. The idea of dragging this into a courtroom felt like throwing a match into a sealed room. But it was the only option. That night, Rebecca had me sign a formal engagement letter and begin drafting a sworn statement. I described the audit assignment, the anomalies, the extraction patterns, the NDA pressure, the surveillance cues, the frozen finances. Each sentence felt like stepping further from safety and closer to truth. Around midnight, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I didn't answer. Rebecca watched me. "Don't," she said quietly. I set the phone down and felt the dead man switch ticking in the background like a second heartbeat. I checked in manually, not because I trusted the system, but because I wanted to control the moment of release. I wasn't ready to burn everything yet. Not until the court filings were ready. Not until the narrative was shaped. Rebecca looked at me across the table. "Once we do this," she said, "there's no going back." I met her gaze. I stopped going back when my webcam turned on by itself. She nodded once. "Then we move." In the early hours, as Manhattan kept breathing outside the window, Rebecca finalized the emergency motion. We would file in the morning. We would request protection. We would demand an investigation. We would place the system under scrutiny. I felt something shift inside me. Not courage, not bravado. Commitment. Because now, if they came for me, they wouldn't just be silencing a man. They would be attacking a case on record in the Southern District of New York. And that meant the game had changed from secret pressure to public consequence. I wasn't safe. But I was no longer invisible. The first filing hit the federal docket at 9:03 a.m. Rebecca didn't celebrate. She didn't even look satisfied. She simply refreshed the page until the case number appeared. Southern District of New York. My name on record. The corporation named. Allegations described in language that was careful, precise, and impossible to ignore. Once it was filed, it existed. That's the thing about federal court. Once something enters that system, it stops being rumor and becomes history. But history has enemies. By 11:20 a.m., my phone exploded with notifications. Internal emails from former colleagues. Missed calls from unknown numbers. A text from Ethan. "You don't understand what you've triggered." He was wrong. I understood perfectly. What I didn't know yet was how far they were willing to go. Rebecca's office turned into a command center. Legal assistants printing motions. Secure calls scheduled. A quiet tension that felt like air before a storm. Rebecca briefed me quickly. "They're filing a counterclaim," she said. "Breach of contract. Mishandling classified information. Potential violation of federal statutes." "Expected," I replied. Yes, but the speed means they were ready. Of course they were ready. They had known before I did that this might happen. At 2:14 p.m., Marcus Hill called. His voice was calm, measured, curious without being hungry. "I've reviewed the materials Rebecca shared," he said. "If what you're alleging is accurate, this is systemic." "It is," I said. "Then understand something," Marcus continued. "Once this goes public, it doesn't stay controlled. Markets react, agencies respond, narratives spin." "I don't want chaos," I said. "No one who exposes power ever does," he replied quietly. By evening, the first article went live. Not explosive, not sensational, but surgical. Federal contractor accused of unauthorized domestic data extraction, my name included. Framed as whistleblower, not traitor. The SUV reappeared outside Rebecca's building that night. Different plate. Same tint. They weren't hiding anymore. They were reminding. At 8:32 p.m., a new development. My remaining financial accounts were frozen under investigation for security review. Even my credit cards declined. They weren't just applying pressure. They were testing whether I would panic. I didn't. Because the dead man switch was now tied to media release triggers. If something happened to me, arrest, disappearance, accident, additional logs would surface. The system was learning something new. I wasn't bluffing. Around midnight, Rebecca received a sealed emergency motion from opposing counsel, a request to impose a gag order on me, citing national security risk. Classic containment, she muttered. Will it work? I asked. She looked at me carefully. It depends on the judge. The next morning, we stood in federal court. The courtroom felt smaller than I imagined. No dramatic lighting, no cinematic tension, just wood panels, quiet authority, and a judge who had seen every kind of deception humanity could produce. When opposing counsel described me as a reckless employee who misunderstood classified systems, I felt the room tilt slightly, not emotionally but strategically. They were reframing me as unstable. Rebecca countered with clarity. Your Honor, my client documented unlawful access patterns, attempted internal reporting, and sought counsel before public disclosure. He is not a threat to national security. He is asking for it to be upheld. The judge watched both sides like a scientist observing specimens. Then came the moment. Opposing counsel implied that my data copy constituted theft of classified material. Rebecca responded without hesitation. If the material was unlawful to collect in the first place, its classification does not immunize misconduct. Silence. The judge leaned forward slightly. Mr. Archer, he said, looking at me directly for the first time, did you attempt internal resolution before seeking legal counsel? Yes, Your Honor, I said steadily. And what was the response? My access was suspended, my finances restricted. I was pressured to sign expanded non-disclosure terms. A flicker of something passed across the judge's face. Not belief, not disbelief. Consideration. The ruling wasn't immediate, but the judge denied the emergency gag order. That denial was oxygen. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited. Marcus's article had ignited more interest than expected. Questions about domestic surveillance always do. People don't mind being watched abroad. They mind being watched at home. As microphones extended toward me, Rebecca whispered, measured, not emotional. I acted because I believed federal law was being bypassed, I said clearly. This case is about accountability, not politics. Simple. Clean. But that night, as I returned to my temporary apartment in Manhattan, I knew something irreversible had happened. The fight was no longer private. It was national. And power doesn't lose quietly. The smear campaign began 3 days later. Anonymous sources, leaked suggestions, articles questioning my psychological stability, a blog post claiming I had disciplinary history, an opinion segment suggesting I misunderstood technical architecture. They weren't attacking the evidence. They were attacking the messenger. Marcus called me. They're testing character assassination, he said. If they can fracture public perception, they reduce the pressure. Do you believe them? I asked. No, he said. But belief isn't the battlefield. Perception is. Meanwhile, a sealed federal investigation was announced into the corporation's compliance practices. That alone shook markets. Stock prices dipped. Analysts speculated. Daniel Cole appeared on financial television, calm as ever. Our company operates fully within legal frameworks, he said. We take allegations seriously, but categorically deny misconduct. He didn't mention my name. That was deliberate. Make the whistleblower small. Make the corporation large. Rebecca and I met that evening. They'll try to isolate you, she said. Pressure friends, former colleagues. She was right. My sister received a call from someone claiming to be conducting a routine background review. My landlord in D.C. informed me my lease would not be renewed due to building renovations. Renovations. I felt anger rise for the first time, not fear, not calculation. Anger. They were expanding the battlefield beyond me. That was a mistake, because escalation cuts both ways. I authorized Rebecca to release a second tranche of documents, carefully redacted, legally vetted, but undeniable. Logs showing scale, volume, pattern repetition. Marcus published again. This time, the headline was sharper. Public response intensified. Civil liberties groups demanded transparency. Congressional staffers requested briefings. And then something unexpected happened. An internal employee came forward anonymously through Rebecca's office, corroborating portions of my claim. They weren't alone inside that system. That revelation shifted everything. This was no longer Vincent Archer versus a corporation. It was a fracture inside the machine. Daniel responded aggressively, announcing internal restructuring and placing blame on technical misinterpretations. But restructuring is what you do when guilt breathes too loudly. Then came the escalation I had anticipated but hoped to avoid. A federal agency announced a preliminary inquiry into whether I had mishandled classified data. They were creating symmetrical risk. If I went down, the case would collapse under ambiguity. Rebecca met my eyes when we read the notice. "This is where they try to scare you," she said. "They're late," I replied, because the dead man switch had already been updated. If formal charges were filed against me, additional logs would auto-release to a consortium of investigative journalists. I wasn't threatening chaos. I was ensuring balance. The following week, a subpoena arrived for Daniel Cole to testify under oath in a closed congressional session. That was the first crack in his armor. Power hates oaths. The hearing wasn't public, but leaks are inevitable when stakes rise. Daniel's testimony, carefully worded, legally armored, was reported as non-committal. But the existence of the hearing meant something crucial. Oversight had been activated. Marcus met me in person for the first time at a quiet cafe in Midtown. "You understand," he said, "that this will define you." "I know," I replied. "Are you prepared for what comes after? Win or lose?" I considered that. Winning wouldn't restore anonymity. Losing wouldn't restore safety. There was no return to the life I had before the webcam light flickered on. "I wasn't prepared," I said honestly. "But I'm committed." Public sentiment had shifted. Opinion polls showed growing distrust in domestic surveillance programs. Advocacy groups organized panels. My name appeared in headlines alongside words like accountability and oversight. Daniel attempted one final maneuver. Through back channels, an offer was made. Financial settlement, immunity from prosecution, confidentiality, permanent silence. It was more money than I had ever seen on paper. Rebecca didn't even let me finish reading. "If you take this," she said quietly, "you validate their strategy." I looked at the number again. Then I closed the file. "No," I said. The next morning, congressional members announced a formal review into the contractor's federal agreements. The stock fell sharply. Daniel's public statements became defensive instead of confident. Inside the system, people were recalculating. That night I received no calls, no threats. Silence. Real silence, which is often more terrifying than noise. The final ruling didn't feel cinematic. There was no dramatic music, no triumphant applause. Just a judge reading findings in measured tone. The court determined that sufficient evidence existed to warrant independent investigation into the contractor's data practices. Protections were granted under federal whistleblower statutes pending outcome. It wasn't a conviction. It wasn't a revolution. It was accountability beginning. Outside, reporters asked if I felt victorious. I didn't. I felt tired. Because systems don't collapse from one exposure. They adapt, they rebrand, they restructure. Daniel Cole resigned to pursue other opportunities. That was the official language. Unofficially, he had become a liability. The corporation announced compliance reforms. Oversight committees formed. Was justice complete? No. Was silence preserved? Also no. Weeks later, I returned briefly to Washington, D.C., not to reclaim anything, but to see the city without paranoia. The streets looked the same, but I wasn't. At night, I still notice cameras, still watch reflections in glass, still think in layers. The difference is this. They know I will document. They know I will prepare. They know I will not disappear quietly. The webcam light hasn't flickered on again. Maybe they learned. Or maybe they're waiting. Either way, I am too. Because the truth isn't a weapon you swing once. It's a position you hold. And I've chosen mine.